Cam Skattebo, big body running back who catches passes out the backfield. So fantasy cheat code, right? I'm joined by John Bauer of the Dynasty Theory podcast to break down this very intriguing running back as we head towards rookie draft season. John, are you a believer in the potential of Cam Skattebo, or do you think there's too many flaws in his game to be that kind of Dynasty cheat code?
See, I think there's flaws, but it's baked into his price, right? If we look at strictly his production, 47% average rush attempt market share, 94th percentile, over 2.5 rushing yards per team carry, massive touchdown upside in both the passing game and on the ground. He's got the receiving market share, and it's not just cheap dump offs, right? It's what you talked about. He gives you the receiving upside. He was a huge part of that Arizona State offense. As he went, so did the team. We knew he was going to be a little bit slower, right? And that's reflected in the 40 time, and as a result, the speed score. But when you look at the splits between the 10 and 20 yard splits versus the 40 yard, there is hope there, right? He doesn't have the long speed, but he gives you the short burst. He gives you the explosion. And I think he can work out of several different schemes. He can do it out of the zone. He can do it out of the gap schemes, so I think there is, like you said, there are flaws, but it's baked into his price. And right now, when we look at Cam Skattebo, I'm sitting here, he's my running back 6 off the board, but I will say there is quite a gap between that top 5 and kind of the rest of this class as I see it today.
Yeah, I think, as you said, there's some clear knocks. I think the top speed we know is an issue. I think he gets caught from behind far too often. I have real issues with sort of his wiggle. I think at times he basically opts to, I'm just going to try and run somebody over rather than trying to set up a defender. Can he, those sort of subtle movements that get defenders off balance that allow you to run through arm tackles? He doesn't really bother with that. He's just like, I'm just going to try and run you over. I think in space,
but to that point, Rich, and I don't want to interrupt, but he was at 0.35 missed tackles forced per attempt this year, but only behind Ashton Genty. So you could question the wiggle, but he's still running through these dudes.
Yeah. And I think on the point you made about scheme, I think I can see what you're saying in that he can operate in zone schemes. I think he's much better in that kind of power gap scheme. And I think that would be where you'd want him. If we're going to see now, the NFL's become far more homogenous and kind of scheme agnostic, should we say? But if we're going back to 5 years ago, that sort of Shanahan outside zone, I don't see him as a perfect fit in that sort of environment. The truth is that there's probably like 2 teams that actually run that sort of 60-70% outside zones type scheme stuff. So I think for me it comes down to, I really like the guy. He's my RB5. I think the price, as you said, is really encouraging. And I think that if I'm going to take a shot on a guy outside of what I would perceive as the elite talents, the first thing is receiving upside. He's got that. The second thing is he going to get that kind of touchdown goal line equity? I think he's got that. But before we move on to the numbers, though, if you are watching this and you want more of my opinions on all of these rookie prospects, hit the join button down below. You get a free copy of the rookie guide, silver tier and above. You will not regret it. So looking at the numbers, as you can see, absolutely monster year this year. As you said, the team went as he went kind of thing. It was absolutely ridiculous, the usage. Do you think that he's going to be able to step into the league as a 70+% opportunity share guy? Or do you think that because he doesn't have that kind of elite athleticism, we're going to see him paired with like a thunder and lightning type, and he may miss out on some carries between the 20s on, more explosive downs? I don't want to say passing downs because that's where he's good, but if it's 2nd and 8, are we going to see him come off the field?
Yeah, for sure. But I also think that kind of points to the direction that the NFL is heading in general. How many players are truly getting 65, 70, 75% of the running back opportunities? And I don't think it's many. So when you look at schemes that you talk about the gap and the power, like, yeah, Arizona has James Conner and Trey Benson, but they're running out of the gap 70% of the time last year. Chargers would be an intriguing fit with Dobbins gone. Jacksonville, like, I think there's opportunities there, but to your point, I do think he's going to ultimately be a little bit more of a committee back, but I want my backs that can catch passes and score touchdowns. So if we're removing some of those opportunities between the 20s, he's still getting the high value touches.
Ollie Gordon, 6'1", 226 pounds, a very powerful back. John, is Ollie Gordon just discount Amari Hampton?
I could certainly see that. And you look at the production in 2024, it wasn't there. But I don't know that it was all necessarily his fault. You look at the way defenses schemed against Oklahoma State and the poor offensive line play. So from a number standpoint, when you're looking at 2023 versus 2024, there was a huge step back. And I think people would be looking at Ollie Gordon quite differently if those seasons were flipped. Like if Ollie Gordon were coming out with a 2,100 scrimmage yard season, 22 touchdowns, I think he would certainly be getting a lot more steam. And you talk about being a discount of Amari Hampton, who very well could go in the first round of the NFL draft. When you look at a player like Ollie Gordon, I think it's maybe very early day 3, but that's not necessarily a death sentence or indictment on Ollie Gordon, because we've seen running backs be successful in that early 4th, 5th round range in the NFL draft. And Ollie Gordon, he gives you durability. 39 games since 2022 for Oklahoma State. He played in all 39. He gives you the rush attempt market share. We talked about it in a previous video with Cam Skattebo. He gives you the rush yards per team carry. He gives you the reception market share, but I don't think he is going to be as much of a receiving threat as a player like Cam Skattebo, because you look at the reception market share versus the receiving yard market share, and there is a pretty significant dip. So a lot of it might be just dump offs, but he is still giving you the big touchdown upside. Missed tackles forced. You have on the screen powerful runner, and he is, but his missed tackles forced, it was pretty low given his size. He's not giving you kind of the Cam Skattebo treatment, if you will. But yeah, I think Ollie Gordon in the right situation, he could produce and give us, probably some running back 2 upside, not the running back 2, but top 24 upside in a given situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are finding this for the first time, hit that subscribe button down below. We are previewing every single fantasy relevant player you need for rookie draft season. I really like Ollie Gordon. I think there is a lot to like. As you said, that kind of second season was phenomenal, unbelievable usage, unbelievable production. When I watch him, I feel like I just want more. Like it feels like he's a solid, like if you came home with like a B- on your report card, it's like your parents are like, yeah, you did all right, but I just want a bit more. And that's what I feel like Ollie Gordon is. It's like, yeah, he runs behind his pads well. I think he's really good between the tackles, but he doesn't kind of break enough tackles, as you mentioned earlier. I think in terms of the vision, it's like, I don't think he's got bad vision, but I don't think I think he misses lanes. I think he misses cutback opportunities too often. In the receiving game, he doesn't add any value. He is a check down option who, he'll, if the pass is thrown to him in open space, he'll catch it. He'll kind of get some yards after the catch, but he's not gonna, be able to break down and kind of create separation one-on-one versus a linebacker or a safety or things like that. It's just, I feel like he's good. And I just don't know, like, if in the NFL that might be that, as you said, he, in the right situation, if he gets volume, he could have those kind of RB2 type seasons where it's, he sees 200 carries, 40 targets, pumps out, a solid RB2 season. You're like, okay, that was solid. But the NFL team is always looking for somebody slightly better and looking for an option to get kind of more explosion and more excitement on the field. And for me, it's like at this point in the draft, in rookie drafts, I'm probably more chasing the upside. And I just don't know if it's maybe I'm being a bit harsh on him, but I feel like I'd rather opt for someone who could potentially be an RB1. The chances are they probably flame out and don't do anything. I just don't know if I see for Ollie Gordon that ceiling outcome more than just being solid.
I don't disagree with you. When I look at Ollie Gordon, I have him kind of right in that running back 9 to 11 tier. But again, the drop off starts to grow a little bit when you get from that top tier, top 2 tiers even. But like maybe around 301, 303 range in 12-team Superflex tight end premium. And especially like if he does creep up to the end of day 2, if he does get an intriguing landing spot, you have on the screen here scheme versatility. He was effective, used multiple ways, zone, gap. He can be used in those ways. So you talked earlier about being teams being scheme agnostic. Like it could be a situation like Denver where things are like kind of 50-50 from a scheme perspective. And, I ultimately, I think people are going to be a little bit higher on Ollie Gordon. And part of that is because of the name recognition. Part of that is because what we saw from him in 2023. And again, that drop off wasn't necessarily all his fault. But like you said, like I said, he's a good back. Is he truly going to be a difference maker at the next level? I'm skeptical. So if you want to take that shot in the early third in your 12-team super flex leagues, no issue there. But if we're talking about a second round pick, I would probably look to explore other options at that point.
Devin Neal's one of the biggest enigmas in this draft. Is he an explosion, a potential 3-down back? Is he just a complementary piece that's not going to be fantasy relevant? JB, let's just ask the question. Devin Neal, you a fan or are you not?
Yeah, I like Devin Neal. So many of these early day 3 backs it's going to be a fit question. It's going to be an opportunity question. And whenever you're thinking about these guys that could go day 2 versus day 3, like I think we're going to see a lot of variance draft to draft where a guy might go in the 4th, 5th, even 6th round. But if they get an intriguing spot, if there aren't any other high value rookies added, if there's maybe a question mark on the incumbent and the running back situation on that team in general, like I think we're going to see a lot of variance. And like Devin Neal is one of those guys that I would not be shocked to see him go 204, 205 in 12-team Superflex rookie drafts. But also he's a good back all around. I would still probably be a little bit lower than, like I just mentioned, that 204 spot. So good back, but like you said, quite the enigma. He can do a little bit of everything, getting that 4.58 40 time. He's explosive. He's got the vertical. He did the broad jump extremely well. The relative athletic score, it was okay in general, but I think part of that is just because of his size. Obviously it gets calibrated. But we talked about durability with Ollie Gordon. With Devin Neal, no missed games over the last 3 years, missed 1 game in 2021. So I think this is going to be a guy that certainly can give us a nice fit in certain situations. He's a back I wouldn't necessarily hate to see alongside Jalen Warren here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I really like Devin Neal. I think that to me, he's 5'11", 213 pounds. Like he's not a small back, but he plays like he's like 195. Like I think his movement skills, I think his ability in space, I really like that. Yes, there's slight niggles. I think particularly between the tackles, sometimes vision lets him down. I think he doesn't kind of press holes and set up defenders as much as he should. And I think that probably leads to fewer yards after contact and things like that. The
The missed
receiving
tackles
game,
force per attempt, it's a little bit on the lower side. So,
yeah,
you know, it's all I always love, and I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but I always love when you can really mesh the film and the analytics and what when they come together and you're like, yes, that checks out based on what other folks are seeing. Because I'm not a film guy by any means, and I think a lot of people know that. But it's always nice when those things can mesh.
yeah, absolutely. And as you said, I think there's sort of two types of forcing missed tackles, isn't there? There's guys that are electric agility and kind of
Mhm.
make people miss, or there's guys like Cam Skattebo, Ashton Genty, who have got power, contact balance that run through tackles. And Devin Neal, he's kind of almost too big to be that kind of agile make you miss guy, and he's not big enough to be the kind of power guy, and he sort of sits in the middle. I think the receiving game, there's definitely more upside there. I don't think Kansas perhaps used him to the best of his ability in that sense, but I don't know if he's going to be a plus receiver. And it's like, there's definitely a world where I could see Devin Neal being really useful, kind of a 1A in a kind of complementary backfield. As you said, somewhere like Pittsburgh, pairing with Jalen Warren, I think that could be a really nice fit. But it's then when it comes down to goal line, short yardage, I don't know if he's the kind of guy I want in there. So it's like, are we just going to see him as an early down workhorse between the 20s and he doesn't see any of those high value touches? That would really concern me. So, yeah,
Mhm.
I'm not quite sure on Devin Neal. I think there's a scenario where he could be great. There's a scenario where he could just be kind of a roster clogger type. But yeah, I'm sort of uncertain, shall we say, on Devin Neal. But if you
I think
want
a
any
team like
more,
Houston could be interesting, pairing him with like a Joe Mixon. I
oh,
think that could be an
absolutely.
interesting backfield.
I'm fascinated to see what Houston do as an entire offense this year. I think that could be very interesting. But if you want more of my rookie profiles, we are previewing 90 players plus all my ranks plus all my rookie model and everything you want. Hit the join button down below. You get a free copy of that in the silver tier and above. Look at the numbers, as you can see. Obviously, slightly prolonged career in college. Does that concern you at all? That kind of later coming out, obviously 4 years of production, but didn't come out after that kind of junior year?
No, and I think we're going to see it more and more now. Obviously the COVID phase that's kind of phased out now, where players were getting an extra year of eligibility and staying. Maybe their season was chopped short, or they just didn't have a season. But now with the NIL money, it's going to be really interesting if players are getting paid a significant amount to stay in college, and you look at where they might go in the NFL draft, like I could see situations where we still get effective uh, players in production, and they're sticking around all 4 years, especially like with the running back market. Like it wouldn't surprise me to see production staying a little bit longer. It's not like wide receiver where we really want to see those early breakouts, or the quarterbacks being on the younger side. Like running back, I can live with a player sticking it out in college and then coming out and still being productive.
Dylan Sampson, an intriguing player out of a very weird offense. Can you analyze? Can you do anything with anyone out of this Tennessee offense, or is it just a case of we sort of almost have to throw that aside and see what the NFL think?
When I saw your slides here and I saw kind of the questionable offense, like you look at Tennessee and Jalen Wright, Eric Gray, Ty Chandler. I was going back and looking at the players that have recently come out of Tennessee. The last good fantasy back you can really look at, and I don't want to say the story's been written on Jalen Wright quite yet, but the last good fantasy back was Alvin Kamara, and that was almost a decade ago at this point, to think that when he came out. So it's a really interesting offense. Obviously, they put running backs in a very good situation to be able to produce. You certainly have to take the production out of the Tennessee offense with a grain of salt. And I think what we've seen with Jalen Wright, again, only 1 year in, but I think that's going to be fresh in people's minds. And you're either going to have, I think Dylan Sampson, you said he's interesting. That couldn't be more, True. You're going to have very divisive evaluations when it comes to Dylan Sampson, because yes, we see a lot of good things, but also Jalen Wright, Tennessee, that's going to be in the back of people's minds whenever they have to go hit draft.
Yeah, on film, I really like Dylan Sampson. I think he's got great contact balance. I think he's one of these players that's got good elusiveness and kind of agility, but he understands he needs to get north-south, and he does that in a hurry, and I think that's really impressive. I think good kind of vision, feel in space. Like, there's a lot to like there. But he's one of the only players I've ever watched in college who's getting like 4-man box counts and stuff like that. Like, it's absolutely wild the way that this offense works and what he's having to go up against. So it is, sometimes you're sort of taking things with a pinch of salt. I think, that will obviously be a massive transition to the NFL. I do also have quite slight concerns about that kind of top end speed. Obviously didn't run at the combine. Is that trying to hide something? And I think that, competent in space but not great in space would kind of be the concern of me once we get out of that kind of box and into the open field as such. But before we get into the numbers, if you are joining us for the first time, hit that subscribe button. Every single fantasy relevant rookie is being profiled. We're getting some of the best analysts in the world to come on and talk us through all of these rookies ahead of your rookie drafts. As you can see, limited production those first 2 years, but then kind of blew up this final year. Do you think that throws in any concerns, or are you happy with what he did this last season and comfortable with the evaluation as such?
Yeah, I'm not too concerned with the overall production those first 2 seasons, especially because you can see right there, like, he was efficient with his opportunities. It's not like he was getting 3-4 yards a carry and just wasn't seeing the field, so I think given that, there's not too much concern. Like, we see some players come out and they don't have the most college production, but you can look to some of the peripheral metrics and you can look at some of the efficiency numbers. And I think Dylan Sampson, he fits that bill for me. So when I'm looking at Dylan Sampson, like, I actually have him in the tier above a Devin Neal, above Ollie Gordon. I have him in that running back 7 to 8 tier. You mentioned the top end speed. I thought he was going to be a little bit faster, than what he timed. I was disappointed to see he didn't run at the combine, but now it seems like fewer and fewer players are actually taking part in those drills. Like, come on, guys, this is for the fans. Get out there, let's go. But you talked about him going north and south very quickly. It's one cut and go, but he does give you the missed tackles force per attempt that I've talked about with some of the previous prospects at 0.27. So better than Devin Neal, better than Ollie Gordon, still not to that Cam Skattebo level, but he gives you kind of the minimum you're looking for in the receiving game, and the scrimmage college dominator, what he was able to do with this last season, it certainly shows that he is able to give you, and you have on the screen there, 3-down versatility. Missed 1 game in the last 2 years. So I think we talk about a lot of guys in this class. There's pretty solid durability when we look across the board here. So Dylan Sampson, running back 7 to 8. I'd be okay once we get to like 209 in 12-team super flex rookie drafts. It's get everything that could potentially get flipped upside down, Rich, once we get these landing spots, because we're going to get some of these guys. Dylan Sampson, he might be buried behind 2 guys that we feel pretty good about, whereas maybe an Ollie Gordon goes to a situation where it's like, he could very well be the dude here in a couple weeks. So I can't wait for the NFL draft.
Yeah, absolutely. Very excited. And sounds like we're kind of similar with where we've got Sampson. I think for me, just that potential ceiling, that potential 3-down versatility bumps him ahead of that 4th tier for me. I'd throw him in a similar bucket to Cam Skattebo, Caleb Johnson for me in terms of my evaluation, where I'd have him in that sort of pre-draft process. And yeah, I think he's a tier ahead of, the Devin Neals, Ollie Gordons, guys like that. So sounds like we're similar. I think if you were talking range of outcomes, I think there's absolutely a world where he becomes a bust. I think there's absolutely a world where he's potentially got that kind of top 12 dynasty running back upside. Where he falls
Yeah,
with that, I have no idea.
You talk about potentially being a bust. We could say that about every single prospect, but certainly once we hit the second rounds, and I was just talking about this to somebody, Mitch and I on Dynasty Theory, this was months ago. I think it was last off season. We did like a 2021 rookie draft redo, and we were like, all right, let's do 2 rounds. And once we had our first 12 picks in, we were like, do we really have to commit to doing 2 rounds? Because it got ugly. And it was 2021 or 2022. But that kind of goes to your point, when you get out a few years and you're a few years removed from these rookie drafts, when we get to the second rounds here, more often than not, there's not going to be a ton of production, but hopefully along the way, you do have a window to move on from them. And I think Dylan Sampson's a guy that could pop off at some point, and you could either get the production or you could move off of them and recoup the value.
Trevor Etienne, 5'9", 198 pounds, obviously the brother of Travis. Very different players, though. John, are you an Etienne fan, or do you think that there's some serious knocks in this game here?
I'm not a huge Trevor Etienne fan. Playing 2 years at Florida, then heading over to Georgia, like he missed 5 games over his last 2 years with Georgia. He doesn't give you a ton of production with some of these other backs. You look at the rush attempt market share, the rush yards per team rush attempt, the scrimmage college dominator. Like, it isn't necessarily there for Trevor Etienne. He's below 18% scrimmage college dominator, but it's not necessarily a death sentence because of the way some of these teams use their backs. They like the rotation. And you look at players like, I was going through a list of guys that were at that 18% or below that have been fantasy relevant: Josh Jacobs, Chris Carson, Antonio Gibson, Devontae Freeman, James Cook, Ramondre Stevenson, Damian Harris, all guys that were able to produce at the next level. So it's not necessarily completely toss him aside, but for the most part, I think people are going to be a lot higher on Trevor Etienne than I am. And if we're talking about a price that I'd be looking to get him, 308, 309, you want to take a shot back into the third, I'm okay with it. But the lack of production, it certainly does stand out to me.
Yeah, before we dive into my thoughts, if you want 90 rookies profiled, film analysis, you want analytical models, you want rankings, hit the join button down below, become a member of the Sanctuary, and you get a free rookie guide, silver tier and above, every single thing you will need to win your rookie drafts. Yeah, I mean, you've basically summed up my thoughts really nicely there, John. I think there's some intrigue from me because of the receiving ability. I think that he's competent in space. I think he's a natural hands catcher. That always intrigues me when we're looking at any running back. But then you look at the rest of the game and it's like, okay, he's got kind of competent sort of plus agility, I'd say, decent vision, but I've not seen a what I'd call a power back, a power conference back that gets tackled by weak arm tackles as often as Trevor Etienne. It is ridiculous. You see, you think of Georgia, you think of Florida, like these absolute running back factories, some of the guys that come through there, and the amount of times, a D tackle will just get like a hand on him and he comes down. It's like that shouldn't happen in college. There's no way that's going to happen in the NFL. Like, it's ridiculous. I think that he's probably not big enough or not good enough athlete to consistently be a workhorse back. So we're like, okay, he's probably only going to be a satellite back, maybe third down work only. I think in terms of running the ball, he bounces to open space far too often. And it's just like, as you said, I don't see a world where he's consistently fantasy relevant. Maybe in like a best ball format where he can have the odd spike week, the odd bit of receiving usage. Yeah, he is the kind of player that can score from longer out. Maybe he has a spike touchdown week, something like that. I just don't see a world where he is consistently fantasy relevant, putting up production. So he's probably a guy that I'd rather just leave to somebody else to draft and go and take a flyer on someone else in a similar price bracket.
I'm not saying folks are absolutely head over heels in love with Trevor Etienne, but if his last name wasn't Etienne, would he get talked about nearly as much? I just asking, just asking.
No, I think you're 100% right. And the crazy thing is that, they're such different players. Like, it's not like they're a carbon copy of each other. They are such different players. But yeah, if we're talking guys that I'm expecting to go after him in the NFL draft, guys like Damian Martinez or Raheem Sanders or, Jaquez Hunter, someone like that, I'd easily take those guys, a floor on those guys over someone like Trevor Etienne.
Yeah, and I think he can be, utilized a little bit better in a zone scheme. You talk about lacking the power. He does have that speed. He gives you one of the better speed scores in the class at 104. Athletic enough, but the durability here, which is something I brought up with other backs, that we don't have that concern. The limited production, and I just don't necessarily get it. And that's hard for me, because when you look at it from a number standpoint, that's really what I'm looking at, and just isn't there for me, Rich. Just isn't there.